Have you ever watched someone be turned away from a hospital, not because there was no bed, not because there was no doctor, but because of how they looked? What would you do if you witnessed that? Hit like if you believe everyone deserves dignity, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love to hear from you. Lagos, Nigeria. A Tuesday morning in July. The kind of morning where the sun comes up fast and hot, pressing down on the city, like a warm iron on damp cloth. The streets of Victoria Island were already filling up, okadas weaving between black SUVs, hawkers balancing trays of bottled water on their heads, office workers in sharp suits walking fast with phones pressed to their ears. Generators hummed behind compound walls. Afrobeats leaked from a passing Danfo bus. The city was already wide awake, already hustling, already alive in that loud, relentless Lagos way. Adanna Osei had been a registered nurse at Meridian Health Group's flagship hospital, Meridian Medical Center, for 4 years. She was 32 years old, with a kind of face that people described as serious. High cheekbones, steady dark eyes, lips that rarely curved into a smile, without good reason.
She was good at her job.
She knew it. Everyone on the ward knew it. She moved through the corridors with confidence, her dark green scrubs pressed, her ID badge gleaming, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. She was the daughter of a Ghanaian schoolteacher. She had earned every single thing she had, and she intended to protect it. It was 7:43 in the morning when the man walked in. He came through the sliding glass doors of the reception hall wearing a faded ankara print shirt, the kind sold at Balogun Market for 500 naira. His trousers were old and slightly too short at the ankles. His sandals were rubber, cracked at the heel. He carried a small black nylon bag that had seen better years, and he walked slowly, one hand pressed to his left side, the other reaching toward the reception counter. His name was Emeka Okafor. He was 47 years old, and he was in pain. "Good morning," he said quietly to the young receptionist behind the desk. "I need to see a doctor. I have had this chest pain since last night, and I am worried it may be." "Sir." The receptionist, a girl named Blessing, cut him off without looking up from her screen. "Do you have your Meridian HMO card?" "No, Proof of private insurance?"
No.
"I just need." "Then you will need to pay a registration deposit of 50,000 naira before any consultation can begin." Emeka blinked slowly. 50,000? I only have. He reached into the nylon bag and pulled out a small brown envelope. "I have 22,000 here. Can I pay the rest later?" "I will bring." Blessing finally looked at him. Her eyes traveled from his cracked sandals to his faded shirt to his face. She shook her head. "Sir, that is not how it works here. This is a private hospital. You need to pay the full deposit. Please." His voice was low, tired. "The pain is very serious. I have been pressing my chest since midnight. If you could just let me see someone for 5 minutes." That was when Adanna walked by. She was heading from the nursing station toward the pharmacy corridor, a clipboard tucked under her arm, her mind already 3 tasks ahead of her body. She overheard the conversation. She slowed. She looked at the man, this thin, middle-aged man in his cracked sandals, pressing one hand to his chest, sweat gathering at his temples, and she made a decision. She walked to the counter. "Is there a problem here?" she asked Blessing. "He does not meet the financial requirement for registration," Blessing said. Adanna looked at Emeka, assessed him with the speed of someone trained to process people quickly. Then she looked back at Blessing, and she said something she would spend weeks wishing she could reach back in time and swallow. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice brisk and professional, "I'm sorry, but this facility has protocols in place. If you are not able to meet the payment requirements, there is a government hospital on Ikordu Road that will be better suited to your situation." The man looked at her, not with anger, not with desperation, with a kind of quiet, steady recognition, as if he had seen exactly who she was in that single moment and filed it away carefully, the way you file something you know you will need later. "I am not a poor man in the way you think," he said softly. "I simply do not carry much cash on my person. If you could allow me to make a call?" "Sir." Adanna straightened. "I understand this is difficult, but I cannot override hospital policy. I would advise you to proceed to a facility that can better accommodate your current situation. She turned and walked away. She did not look back. Emeka Okafor stood at the counter for one more moment. Then he straightened the collar of his faded ankara shirt, picked up his nylon bag, and walked toward the exit. Just before he pushed through the glass door, he paused. He turned and looked back at the hospital, at the marble floors, the high reception ceiling, the bronze lettering above the desk that read Meridian Health Group in polished, gleaming letters. And he smiled, very quietly, to himself. Nobody noticed. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody in that lobby knew that the man in the cracked sandals and the old rubber slippers was Emeka Okafor, the chief executive and sole owner of the Meridian Health Group, the same hospital group that had just turned him away. He owned every bed in that building, every scanner, every operating theater, every square meter of marble floor. He owned the chair that Blessing sat in. He owned the badge clipped to Adanna's chest. He came in like this sometimes, unannounced, dressed as an ordinary man, to see how his staff treated people who had nothing. The habit had come from his mother, a quiet, iron-willed woman from Enugu who used to say that you can only truly know the character of a place on the day it does not know who is watching. Today, he had seen enough. Outside on the pavement, he reached into his nylon bag and pulled out his actual phone, a matte black device preloaded with the morning's reports. He dialed a number. It picked up on the first ring. Chukwemeka. Sir. Get me a full staff report from Meridian Medical Center. Every nurse, every receptionist, every administrator on duty this morning between 7 and 9 a.m. I want it on my desk by noon. A brief pause. Yes, sir. Understood. He ended the call. The black SUV that had been parked discreetly 2 buildings down pulled forward. His driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Emeka lowered himself in carefully, one hand still pressed against his left side. The pain was real, even if the test was deliberate. He would have his private physician look at it that afternoon. He did not look back at the hospital. But somewhere inside, behind the marble floors and the shining badge of Nurse Adanna Osei, who was already 3 tasks ahead and thinking about nothing except the rest of her shift, the clock had quietly started counting down. By the time Adanna arrived home that evening, she had almost forgotten the man in the cracked sandals. She lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Surulere, one of the older residential parts of Lagos, the kind of neighborhood that still had trees growing between the houses and neighbors who said good evening through the fence. The apartment was neat and carefully organized. A small shelf of medical textbooks sat above the television. A framed photograph of her mother hung on the wall near the kitchen. On the counter, a small bottle of shea oil and a wooden comb rested beside a bowl of half-eaten fried plantain, the quiet evidence of a woman who lived alone but kept her space with intention. Adanna had grown up in Kumasi, Ghana. 3rd of 4 children born to a schoolteacher father and a seamstress mother who had worked 6 days a week, every week, to put all 4 of them through university. Fabric scraps on the kitchen floor. The sound of a sewing machine running past midnight. The smell of chalk and starch. That was her childhood. Coming to Lagos had been a leap, a deliberate step upward. The salary at Meridian was triple what she would have earned in Accra, and the professional reputation of the hospital carried weight across West Africa. She had fought for her place here. She intended to keep it. She changed out of her scrubs, reheated a bowl of egusi soup with EBA she had made 2 nights before, and sat at her kitchen table with her phone. 3 missed calls from her younger sister Abina. 1 long voice note from her mother, thick with chui and warmth. She listened to her mother's voice and felt the familiar pull of guilt that came from living this far from home. She called Abina, sister. Abina's voice was light and teasing, as it always was. You sound tired. I am tired. Difficult day? Adanna paused. Normal, she said. Busy morning. 2 patient discharges. 1 complicated drip change. A training session on the new documentation software that lasted 40 minutes longer than it needed to. She did not mention the man at the counter. It had been a clean decision, made within the boundaries of hospital protocol. She had redirected him to an appropriate facility. She had not raised her voice. She had not been unkind. She had simply done what the rules required. And yet, there was something in the way he had looked at her. Not with anger. Not with desperation. With a calm, level recognition, the look of someone who had fully seen you and was storing the information without judgment. It was the kind of look that stayed with you precisely because it asked for nothing. She pushed the thought aside, finished her dinner, and went to bed at 10. She slept. The next morning she arrived at Meridian at 6:50, 10 minutes before her shift. She changed, clipped on her badge, and went to the nursing station to review the overnight handover notes. The ward was beginning its slow morning waking, breakfast trolleys, the beep of monitors, the low voices of night nurses finishing their rounds. It was while she stood at the station that she heard the first whisper. "Did you hear?" Tomoa, a younger nurse with a bright face and a talent for knowing everything first, was speaking low and fast to another colleague named Funmi near the coffee machine at the end of the corridor. "Someone from the corporate office is coming today. Matron got a message this morning first thing." Funmi says Matron looked shaken when she read it. Adanna did not look up from her notes. "Reviews happen quarterly," she said. "This one is different," Tomoa said. "You know Matron never looks shaken." "Matron does not shake." Adanna glanced toward Matron Gozzi's office at the far end of the corridor.
The door was closed.
At this hour, it was almost never closed. She returned to her notes. By 10 in the morning the shift had taken on a different quality, that subtle, charge-in-the-air feeling that hospitals get when authority is present and watching. Staff walked fractionally straighter. Voices dropped half a notch. Even the patients in the beds who knew nothing seemed to sense something had changed in the temperature of the building. At 11:15, 3 people in corporate attire arrived at the nursing station and asked for the charge nurse. Adanna stepped forward. "I am the senior nurse on duty," she said steadily. "How may I help you?" The man at the front of the group was tall, mid-30s, with the measured politeness of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information without showing it on his face. He introduced himself as Chukwemeka, Senior Director of Operations for Meridian Health Group. His 2 colleagues, one a woman with a leather folder pressed to her chest, the other a younger man with a tablet, stood slightly behind him. "We are conducting a targeted review of patient intake procedures," Chukwemeka said. "We will need the patient interaction logs from yesterday morning. The 7 to 9 a.m. window specifically." Adanna's hands went still on her clipboard. "Of course," she said. Her voice did not waver. "I will have them pulled for you immediately." She turned and walked to the records room. The corridor felt longer than usual. In the records room, she found the log sheet for Tuesday morning and stood staring at the 7:43 a.m. entry in her own handwriting. Patient refusal, financial eligibility not met. Alternative facility recommended. Staff, Osei, A. For lines.
Clean.
Factual. Correct, by the letter of the protocol. She carried the sheet back to the review team. Chukwemeka took it. He read it without expression. Then he looked up at her, and there it was again, that same quiet, measuring look she had seen the morning before in a pair of tired eyes above a cracked pair of sandals. Not identical, but from the same school of stillness. "Thank you, Nurse Osei," he said. He folded the sheet and placed it carefully in his briefcase. That evening, just as Adanna was preparing to end her shift, Matron Gozzi appeared in the corridor and beckoned her with a small, deliberate motion of one hand. Adanna followed her into the office. The door closed behind them with a soft, definitive click. Matron sat behind her desk. She folded her hands on the surface in front of her, those strong, capable hands that had managed this ward for 11 years with the steady authority of someone who had seen every possible thing a hospital can show a person. She looked at Adanna the way a mother looks at a child she loves and must not lie to. "The man you turned away yesterday morning," Matron said. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "Do you know who he is?" He did not present identification. He did not meet the financial. "His name," Matron said, "is Emeka Okafor." The name landed in the room. Adanna looked at her. Matron held her gaze and let the silence do the work for a moment. Then she said, "He owns this hospital, Adanna. He owns the entire Meridian Health Group. Every building, every piece of equipment, every bed in this ward. including the chair you sit in. The blood left Adanna's face so fast she felt the cold of it. He comes in from time to time, Matron continued, her voice still quiet and level, dressed simply unannounced, to observe how his staff treats people who appear to have nothing. He began doing this years ago. His mother was once turned away from a clinic when he was a boy. She was sick, and they would not see her because she could not pay immediately. He never forgot it. He built this entire group partly in response to that memory. And every few years, he comes to check. The room was very still. What happens now? Adanna asked. Her voice came out smaller than she had intended. Matron looked at her for a long moment. Not with cruelty. With something harder to bear, honesty delivered with care. I do not know yet, she said. But I want you to think very carefully tonight. Not about what the protocol says happened at that counter. About what actually happened. What you saw. What you decided. And who you decided it about. She gave Adanna a small, firm nod of dismissal. Adanna walked out of the office and stood alone in the corridor of the hospital she had given 4 years of her life to. Around her, the evening shift was settling in. Monitors beeped. A patient laughed at something on a television screen. The smell of antiseptic and warm food moved through the air. And somewhere across the city, in an office she had never seen, the man whose hospital she had just turned him away from was sitting down to read a staff report with her name on it. Adanna did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed in Surelair with the ceiling fan turning slowly above her and her mind turning faster. The apartment that had always felt like a safe harbor, her books, her mother's photograph, her careful small life, felt different in the dark.
Smaller.
Less solid. The walls she had built around herself with discipline and hard work felt, for the first time, like they might not be enough. She thought about Emeka Okafor. She tried to reconstruct the moment at the counter with honesty, not the sanitized version that lived in the log, but the real version. The one that happened in her body before her mouth opened. The way she had looked at his sandals. The way she had looked at his shirt. The way her mind had moved to its conclusion before he had finished his second sentence. She had processed him the way you process a category, not a person. She knew this about herself now, and the knowing sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She was up before 5. Dressed by 5:30. At the hospital by 6:15. The corridors were quiet at that hour. The night shift nurses moved with the reduced energy of people who had been awake too long. The ward smelled of antiseptic and the faint warmth of the hospital kitchen preparing morning meals. Adanna sat in the break room with a cup of tea she did not drink and waited for the day to begin, because waiting felt more bearable than lying in the dark. By 7:30, the morning shift nurses had arrived, and the word was already moving through the ward the way words always move in hospitals, fast, low, and precise. Tamawa found her in the break room.
Ada.
Tamawa sat down across from her with the careful face of someone who was about to say a thing they knew would land hard. I heard something.
Tell me.
Blessing from reception. She got a call from the HR director first thing this morning asking her to document everything from yesterday's intake, every person who came through that door, every interaction, every decision. She went back to the CCTV footage last night. Tamawa paused. She recognized him. His face is on the front page of the Meridian Annual Report. It sits in a frame in the reception lobby. She has walked past it 400 times. I know who he is, Adanna said. Tamawa stared at her. You know. And you are sitting here with cold tea. What would you have me do, Tamawa?
Ada.
Tamawa leaned forward, and her voice dropped low and urgent. If this man decides to make an example of someone, it will be the most visible person in that interaction. Blessing only followed the payment protocol. She can point to the screen and the rules and the training manual. You stepped in voluntarily. You were the senior nurse. You are the one who directed him to Ikordu Road.
She stopped.
That was your voice. Your choice. The words were true. Adanna knew they were true, and still they hit differently spoken out loud in the gray morning light. I followed the protocol, she said quietly. Protocol does not care about your rent, Tamawa said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. Adanna's shift that day was the longest she had worked in years. Not because the workload was unusual, but because she carried something extra through every task, a low, persistent awareness that pressed at the edges of her concentration. She changed dressings and updated charts and spoke to patients and administered medications with her usual precision, and underneath all of it, the awareness hummed without stopping. At 2 p.m, Matron Gozi appeared at the nursing station and asked Adanna to come to her office. Her voice was neutral. Her face gave nothing. There were 2 people Adanna had not seen before waiting in the office. A woman in a charcoal blazer with close-cropped hair and a folder on her knee. She introduced herself as Adanna Osei, head of human resources for Meridian Health Group. The other was a younger man with a notepad who did not introduce himself at all. Matron sat to the side.
She did not speak.
Adanna Osei looked at Adanna with a measured, careful expression. "Nurse Osei," she said, "we are here to discuss the patient interaction recorded in yesterday morning's log. We would like to hear your account of what occurred in your own words." Adanna sat in the chair in front of the desk and told the truth. All of it. She described arriving at the counter. She described the man pressing his hand to his side. She described the payment protocol. She described directing him to the government hospital on Ikorodu Road. She spoke clearly and without embellishment and without excuse. When she finished, Adanna Osei wrote something in her folder. The young man with the notepad wrote something too. "Thank you for your candor," Adanna said. Then she looked up. "I want to be transparent with you, Nurse Osei. Mr. Okafor is aware of the incident. He has been briefed on your service record, which is, by any measure, excellent. He has not yet made a decision regarding next steps."
She paused.
"However, he has made one specific request." Adanna waited. "He has asked that you be the one to deliver his afternoon medications tomorrow. He will be here, not in a test capacity. He checked himself into the hospital this morning for the chest evaluation he did not receive yesterday." A brief, precise pause. "He wanted you to know that." The room felt very small. "He is here," Adanna said.
"Now."
"Suite 12, the private wing," Adanna said. She closed her folder. "We will be in touch regarding the formal review. In the meantime, you are to continue your regular duties." She stood. The young man with the notepad stood. They left. Matron remained. She looked at Adanna, across the desk. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "He requested you specifically, Ada. Think about what that means." Adanna walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the private wing, and she stood outside the door that said Suite 12 and looked at the grain of the wood and breathed. On the other side of that door was the man she had turned away. The man who owned the building she stood in. The man who was sick enough to finally admit himself after pressing his own hand to his chest since midnight. And he had asked for her. She did not know if it was mercy or a test. She did not know if she was walking toward her redemption or the most humiliating moment of her professional life. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened. Emeka Okafor was sitting upright in the bed of Suite 12, wearing a plain white hospital gown that was a considerable step down from even his faded ankara shirt. He had a 4-line in his left arm and a monitor clipped to his index finger. The room was quiet and clean, soft afternoon light coming through the curtains, a small vase of white chrysanthemums on the side table that the hospital placed in every private suite. A get-well gesture that suddenly felt almost absurd. He looked at Adanna when she entered. She looked at him. For one suspended moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adanna crossed the room with her tray of medication and placed it carefully on the bedside table. Her hands were steady. She had made them steady by an act of pure will that had taken the entire walk down the corridor. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "My name is Adanna Osei. I am your attending nurse this shift. I have your afternoon medications here. I'll explain each one before administration." She paused. "And before I do that, I want to say something that is not part of my clinical duties." He watched her. His expression was calm, unreadable in the same way it had been unreadable at the reception counter. That particular stillness that comes from a person who has learned to wait. "I owe you an apology," Adanna said. "Not a protocol apology. A real one." She took a breath. "Yesterday morning, I looked at you, and I made a judgment before I fully listened to you. I processed you as a category rather than as a person who was in pain and needed help. I have been a nurse for 8 years. The whole foundation of this work is supposed to be the opposite of what I did at that counter. And I am sorry. Genuinely.
She stopped.
She held his gaze. Emeka Okafor studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Nurse Osei." Please. She sat in the chair beside the bed. "Tell me something," he said. His voice was unhurried. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where impatience was expensive. "When you walked to that counter, why did you come? You did not have to. You were passing." Adanna frowned slightly, not expecting the question to go that direction. "I heard the exchange and thought it might need handling. And when you decided to redirect me, was it about the protocol, or was it about moving the situation along so you could continue to your next task?" A long silence. "Both," she said finally. "Honestly, both." He nodded slowly, not with satisfaction, with the nod of a person confirming something they already knew. "I will tell you something about why I do what I do," he said. He shifted carefully against the pillows, adjusting the foreline with the practiced ease of someone who had spent time in hospitals before. "My mother, her name was Chidinma. She was 34 years old when she collapsed outside the market in Enugu. My father was working. My uncle carried her to the nearest private clinic on his back. Literally on his back in the rain." He paused. "They turned her away at the gate because he had no money and no card and no proof. He carried her to a government hospital 4 kilometers away. By the time they arrived, the hemorrhage had gone too far. She died on a plastic chair in a corridor." The room was very quiet. "I was 11 years old," he said. "I watched my uncle carry her body back home. He never forgave himself. He died 5 years later. I believe the grief killed him." He looked at the white chrysanthemums on the table. "I built Meridian with money I took 20 years to accumulate. The first policy I ever wrote for this organization said that no patient presenting with a cardiac symptom could be denied initial assessment regardless of payment status. Basic TRIA.
Free.
Always." He turned back to her. "Yesterday, you turned away a man with active chest pain." Adanna felt the weight of it land fully for the first time. Not the professional weight of a reprimand. The human weight of the actual thing she had done. "I didn't," she stopped herself. "I did not ask about his symptoms clearly enough before redirecting. That was wrong. There is no version of the protocol that should override a cardiac presentation. I know that.
I knew it then."
I moved too fast." Emeka looked at her for a long time. "Your record is exceptional," he said at last. "For years. Not a single formal complaint. Your patient satisfaction scores are among the highest in this facility. 3 commendations." He paused. "Which is why yesterday surprised me. People with records like yours usually see more than the surface of a person." "I should have," she said quietly. "Yes," he agreed. "You should have." He reached for the glass of water on his tray with the deliberateness of someone whose left side still ached, and he drank. Adanna watched him and felt something she had not felt at work in years, the particular discomfort of being seen fully, past the competence, past the badge, down to the actual person making the actual choices. "Administer the medications," he said. "Then I would like to rest." She stood and moved to the tray. She explained each medication clearly and carefully. The blood thinner, the anti-inflammatory, the beta blocker the cardiac physician had prescribed after the morning's evaluation confirmed early-stage pericarditis. She administered each one with the precision of a nurse who knew her work. When she was done, she gathered the tray and moved toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She turned back. She had told herself she would not ask, but something in her, the part that was not an employee, the part that was just a woman trying to understand, made her ask anyway. "Why did you request me specifically?" she said. "You could have asked for any other nurse." Emeka Okafor looked at the window. A long pause. The sound of Lagos far below, distant and alive. "Because," he said slowly, "the people who cause harm are rarely the people who cannot be reached. They are usually the people who stopped paying attention. And a person who has stopped paying attention can sometimes start again." He glanced at her. "I wanted to see which kind you were." Adanna nodded once. She walked out, and pulled the door quietly closed behind her. In the corridor, she stood very still for a moment. Somewhere at the end of the hall, a trolley was being pushed, its wheels squeaking on the floor. A nurse was laughing at something. A monitor was beeping in an even, reassuring rhythm. And somewhere behind a closed door, in Adanna's phone, silent in her locker in the changing room, a text message had just arrived from a Lagos number she did not recognize. She would not read it for another 3 hours. When she did, she would sit down on the bench in the changing room and read it 3 times without moving. It said, "The formal review committee meets Thursday. Your statement will be required. You should also know that the deputy matron position has been vacant for 6 months. Mr. Okafor personally reviews all senior appointments. He has asked that your file be included in the shortlist." She read it a 4th time. The man she had turned away from his own hospital had just quietly placed her name on a list for promotion. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, with the same unremarkable sky and traffic and noise as every other morning, as if the city had no idea that something was about to shift. Adanna had spent the 2 days between the conversation in Suite 12 and the formal review doing what she always did when life became uncertain. She worked. She came in early, stayed focused, checked her charts twice, sat with her patients longer than the schedule strictly required. She changed the dressing on an elderly man named Baba Rasaki, who talked about his farm in Ogun State the whole time, and asked her if she liked ube. She held the hand of a young mother named Nkechi, who was frightened about surgery, and talked her through the procedure step by careful step until the fear in Nkechi's eyes settled into something more like trust. This was the work she had come here to do. This was who she was supposed to be. The review committee met at 2 in the afternoon in the hospital's 3rd-floor conference room. There were 5 people around the table: Adiz Nwosu from Human Resources, the medical director, Chukwemeka the director of operations, a legal officer named Emeka Ease, and a woman Adanna had never seen before who was introduced simply as the board representative. Adanna sat across from them with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. They walked through the incident formally: the timeline, the log entry, the footage from the reception camera, Blessing's account, Adanna's written statement. They were professional and thorough. The medical director asked specifically about the cardiac symptom question, why Adanna had not conducted even a brief verbal triage when the man reported chest pain. Adanna answered honestly, "I did not slow down enough to conduct proper symptom assessment before redirecting. That was a clinical error, not just an administrative one, and I take full responsibility for it." The board representative wrote something. The review lasted 40 minutes. At the end, Adiz Nwosu told her the committee would reach a conclusion within 48 hours and that she would be notified in writing. Adanna thanked them. She stood. She walked out. She was in the stairwell between the 3rd and 2nd floors, taking a moment to breathe in the plain, concrete quiet of it, when she heard footsteps and looked up to see Chukwemeka coming down from the 3rd floor. He stopped when he saw her. He did not look like a man who stopped by accident. "A moment," he said. She waited. He leaned against the stairwell wall with the ease of a man who had learned to find privacy in unexpected places. He looked at her steadily. "I have worked for Emeka Okafor for 9 years," he said. "I have seen him conduct these assessments 4 times. 3 times, the people involved did not recover well from what followed. 1 time, one person did." Adanna said nothing. "He does not tell me what his decisions mean when he makes them," Chukwemeka continued. "He rarely explains himself. But in 9 years, I have learned to read the signals." He paused. He has not asked for a single person's file in the history of this organization in the context of a disciplinary review. He has never once placed a name on a promotion shortlist during an open investigation. He looked at her steadily. "He asked for yours." "I don't understand what he wants," Adanna said. "Neither do I exactly," Chukwemeka said. "But I think he wants to see what you do with the opening he is giving you. A man who built a hospital to honor his mother's memory does not do things without intention." He straightened from the wall. "Whatever the committee decides, and I cannot tell you what that will be, I think your future in this organization has more to do with who you are starting from today than who you were at that counter on Tuesday morning." He went down the stairs and was gone. Adanna stood in the stairwell for another minute. Then she went back to her floor. She had one patient to check on before her shift ended. She went to Suite 12. Emeka was awake, sitting up with a pair of reading glasses on his nose, reviewing something on his phone. The 4 had been removed from his arm. The cardiac physician had confirmed that the pericarditis was mild and responding well to medication. He would likely be discharged on Saturday. He looked, Adanna noted, considerably better than the man who had walked through the sliding doors with a nylon bag and a hand pressed to his chest. She checked his vitals. Blood pressure, strong. Heart rate, steady. She updated his chart. "The review is today?" he asked without looking up from his phone. "Yes, sir." How did it feel? It was such an unexpected question for a patient to ask a nurse that she almost did not answer it. Then, "Necessary," she said. It felt necessary. He took off his glasses and looked at her. "You know what I appreciate about that answer?" "No. You didn't say fine. People who are trying to manage an impression say fine." He set his phone down. "I grew up without very much, Nurse Osei. My father drove other people's cars for 20 years. My mother sewed until her fingers bled. Everything I have, I built from nothing and from loss and from deciding very early that the way institutions treat their most powerless people is the most accurate measure of their soul." He paused. "This hospital is my mother's monument. When someone fails to treat a suffering person with dignity inside these walls, inside any wall that bears my name, it is personal to me, in the most literal way possible." "I understand that now," Adanna said. "Do you?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or, do you understand it abstractly? Because those are two different things." She thought about Baba Rasaki that morning, talking about his Uba farm. She thought about Nkechi's frightened eyes, settling into trust. She thought about 11-year-old Emeka Okafor watching his uncle carry his mother's body through the rain. "I understand it here," she said. She touched her sternum briefly. Not dramatically.
Just honestly.
Not just here. She touched her temple. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Go home and rest, Nurse Osei. You look like a woman who has not slept properly in 3 days." "I haven't," she admitted. "Go home.
Sleep.
Whatever the committee decides, face it in the morning. You cannot receive anything well when you are this tired." She nodded. She gathered her chart and moved to the door. "Nurse Osei." She turned. He had picked his glasses back up and was looking at his phone again, or appearing to. "My mother's name," he said, "was Chidinma. It means God is good." She believed that with her whole life. A pause. She also believed that people were capable of better than their worst moments. She was almost always right about that. Adanna walked home that evening through the warm Lagos dusk, past the suya seller at the corner of her street, past the children playing football in the open compound next door, past the neighbor who said good evening through the fence. She unlocked her door. She heeded nothing. She drank a glass of water, looked at her mother's photograph on the wall, and went to bed. She slept for 9 hours without dreaming. Friday morning, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown internal number. It was a single line. "Committee decision will be delivered Monday. Mr. Okafor has requested you personally accompany his discharge team on Saturday." She stared at the message. Read it again. Then, outside in the corridor of her apartment building, she heard the sound of raised voices, her neighbor's wife, crying, and the low, controlled anger of a man trying to keep his voice down. And through the thin wall came the unmistakable sound of a secret breaking open. Saturday arrived bright and certain, the kind of Lagos morning that seemed unaware of all the complicated human business taking place beneath it. Adanna arrived at the hospital at 7, an hour before the discharge was scheduled. She reviewed Emeka Okafor's final chart, confirmed his medications with the pharmacy, and prepared the discharge summary with the kind of thorough attention she gave to every task, more so this one. At 8:15, a knock came at the door of Suite 12. She pushed it open. Emeka was dressed, properly dressed, not in his test clothes from Tuesday, but in a tailored deep blue agbada that carried itself with quiet authority. He was sitting in the chair by the window, not in the bed. Beside him was a woman Adanna had not seen before. She was perhaps 65, small and composed, with silver locks pinned back and the kind of posture that came from decades of holding herself with dignity. She wore a wrapper of deep burgundy attire and a matching blouse. Her eyes were bright and sharp and immediately friendly. "Nurse Osei," Emeka said, "this is my Auntie Obiageli. She raised me after my mother passed. She insisted on being here for discharge, which—" He glanced at the woman with the particular mixture of exasperation and deep affection that only exists between people who have loved each other through difficulty. "I have learned not to argue with her." Auntie Obiageli turned those bright eyes on Adanna and smiled, a full, genuine smile that rearranged her whole face.
"So, you're the nurse," she said.
"Emeka told me about you." "Auntie," Emeka said, with a slight warning in his voice.
"What?"
"It is true. He told me about the girl at the desk who apologized to him properly. He said." "Auntie Obiageli." The old woman made a short, dismissive sound and waved her hand at him. She looked back at Adanna. "He said you were honest. He said you did not hide behind the rulebook when it was time to tell the truth about yourself. That is rare." She tilted her head. "What is your name, child?" "Adanna. Adanna Osei."
"Ah."
"Ghanaian?" "Yes, ma. From Kumasi." "I know Kumasi." Auntie Obiageli nodded with the satisfaction of someone placing a piece. "Your people are builders. Stubborn builders. It is a good thing to be." Adanna conducted the discharge process with careful professionalism. She reviewed the medications with Emeka, the beta blocker to continue for 6 weeks, the anti-inflammatory for 3, the follow-up cardiac appointment in 10 days. She explained the warning symptoms to watch for. She answered his questions. She gave him the written summary in a sealed folder. Throughout all of it, Auntie Obiageli sat in the chair by the window and watched with those bright, assessing eyes and said nothing more. When it was done, Emeka stood. He was taller standing than Adanna had registered. She had mostly seen him in a hospital bed or pressed against a reception counter. He offered her his hand. She shook it. "Thank you for your care this week," he said. "Whatever comes Monday, I want you to know that this conversation will not end there." She nodded. "I hope not, sir." He moved toward the door. Auntie Obiageli rose and followed, and then at the doorway she stopped and turned back to Adanna with an expression that shifted, less the sharp social brightness of before, more something private and serious. "Come and visit me sometime," the old woman said. "Not here. At my house in Ikoyi. Emeka will give you the address."
She paused.
"I want to tell you about Chidinma, his mother. I want to tell you who she was, because I think you need to understand that story more fully than Emeka will tell you himself." She glanced back at him in the corridor, then back at Adanna. "He tells the facts. He does not tell the feeling. And the feeling is the important part." She walked out before Adanna could respond. Adanna stood in the now empty suite. The bed was stripped. The white chrysanthemums were still in their vase on the side table. The morning light came through the curtain in a long, pale strip across the floor. She stood there for longer than she needed to. By the time she returned to the nursing station, Tamawa was waiting for her with the barely restrained energy of someone sitting on very large information. "You know what I just heard?" Tamawa said, without preamble. "Tamawa. There is going to be a company-wide review of all patient intake protocols across every Meridian facility in West Africa," Tamawa said in a fast whisper. "Not just this one. Every single one. It is going out as a formal directive from the CEO's office. And the person who has been asked to co-lead the protocol revision working group," she stopped for effect, "is a nurse currently employed at this facility." Adanna looked at her. "I am not saying it is definitely you," Tamawa said, with the face of someone who is absolutely saying it was definitely her. "I am simply presenting information I have received." Adanna shook her head slowly. She did not know whether to laugh or cry or simply sit down on the floor of the nursing station and feel all of it at once. "What I do not understand," Tamawa said, settling now into the quieter register of a genuine friend, "is how you go from being the person who turned him away to this." "What did you say to him?" "The truth," Adanna said. "Just the truth. All of it." Tamawa was quiet for a moment. "That is a harder thing than it sounds." "I know," Adanna said. "I know it is." They stood at the nursing station together for a while. Outside the hospital windows, Lagos went about its enormously complex, impossibly human Saturday business. The market sellers and the churchgoers and the children on balconies and the buses lurching through traffic and the kites floating above the rooftops in the slow sea breeze off the lagoon. And in that moment, something Adanna had been carrying since Tuesday morning, the tight, coiled thing she had mistaken for professionalism and was actually fear, began, very slightly, to loosen. Then her phone buzzed. A number she did not recognize. She looked at the screen. The message said, "We need to talk. I know about the Meridian situation.
I know more than you think.
Meet me tonight at Terraculture at 7. You will want to hear what I have to say before Monday. A friend." She stared at the message. She looked around the nursing station. Tamawa had moved away to answer a patient call. The ward hummed its ordinary Saturday hum around her. She read the message again. Before Monday. The committee decision was Monday. Terraculture was one of Lagos's most beloved cultural spaces, a gallery and restaurant in Victoria Island where the walls held paintings by Nigerian artists and the air always smelled of jollof rice and old books. On a Saturday evening, it was full of the particular kind of Lagos crowd that dressed with intention. Women in modern Yoruba gele beside young professionals in linen, older men in embroidered senator shirts beside students in Afrocentric streetwear. Adanna arrived at 5 minutes past 7. She had spent the afternoon arguing with herself about whether to come at all. She had called Tamawa, who said, "If it is dangerous information, you are better knowing it. If it is nonsense, you waste one evening." She had called Abina in Kumasi, who said, "Sister, go. But take your wits with you." She had stood at her apartment mirror for 10 minutes in a deep green wrap dress and decided that going meant she was not afraid, and not going meant the same thing in a different direction. She went. The woman waiting for her at a corner table near the back gallery was someone Adanna recognized immediately, though it took a full 3 seconds for the recognition to connect, the kind of delay that happens when you see a person in a context where they do not belong. It was Adanna Osei, the head of human resources for Meridian Health Group. The woman who had sat across from her at the review table on Thursday, with a folder on her knee. Adanna stopped walking. She considered turning around. Adanna caught her eye and raised one hand, a small, deliberate gesture. Not a wave. A signal that said, "I see you hesitating. I am asking you to sit down anyway." Adanna sat down. "I send the message because I could not use a work channel," Adanna said immediately, before Adanna could speak. "And I could not say what I need to say in the building. What I am about to tell you is not HR business. It is not the committee. It is something else entirely." "Tell me," Adanna said. Adanna looked around the restaurant once, a quick practice scan, then looked back. "There is someone on that review committee who wants a very different outcome from Monday than the one the evidence supports. And they have been working toward it since Wednesday." Adanna kept her face still.
Who?
"The legal officer. Emeka Ease." Adanna picked up her water glass and set it down without drinking. "He has a candidate of his own for the deputy matron position. A nurse from the Abuja facility, a woman who happens to be the niece of his business partner. He has been in this organization long enough and deep enough to know how to manage a review outcome. He has done it before." "What does that mean for Monday?" "It means that regardless of what Emeka Okafor has signaled about your file, the formal recommendation that goes to the board from the committee may not reflect what happened in that review room on Thursday. It may be shaped before it gets there." Adanna paused. The board representative in that meeting, the woman who did not speak, she is the one who matters. She is the deciding voice. And she will receive that recommendation and base her position on it. Adanna stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" Adanna Osei looked at her steadily. She was a woman of perhaps 45, with a particular composure of someone who had navigated complicated organizations for a very long time. "Because I have watched Emeka Ease operate for 7 years," she said. "And because what he is doing is wrong. And because I am tired of being the person who knows things are wrong and says nothing because it is not my direct lane." She looked down at her hands briefly, then back up. "Also because Mr. Okafor deserves to lead an institution that runs with integrity, and he cannot trust what he does not know." "Have you told him?" Adanna said. "I cannot go directly to Mr. Okafor without evidence." I have suspicions and patterns, but not a document I can place on a desk. She looked at Adanna. But you might be able to get one. Ease reached out to Blessing from reception yesterday. She told me this morning, frightened. He asked her to amend her witness account, to say that you had been the initiating party in the refusal, not simply the responding nurse. He told her it would protect her position. He asked her to lie, Adanna said flatly. He asked her to adjust her memory, Adiz said. Which is the same thing dressed in better clothes. She slid a small folded paper across the table. Blessing's personal number. She is frightened, but she is honest. If you speak to her tonight, not as her senior colleague but as someone who is also being affected by this, she may be willing to put her real account in writing. A signed statement that goes directly to the board representative, not through the committee channel. Adanna looked at the folded paper. If this goes wrong, she said carefully, it does not only affect me. It affects you. It affects Blessing. I know that, Adiz said. Why risk it? Adiz was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have 2 daughters. The elder one is studying nursing. When she graduates, I want her to walk into a hospital and know that the institution she serves has some basic commitment to honesty. She picked up her water glass and finally drank. I am doing this for her more than for you. But the result will help you. Sometimes those things can be true at the same time. Adanna picked up the folded paper. She stayed at Terra Culture long enough to drink a glass of cold zobo and think. The gallery on the far wall held a large painting she had never noticed before, a woman in yellow attire standing at the edge of a compound, one hand shading her eyes, looking toward a horizon that was either dawn or dusk. The painter had left it deliberately ambiguous. She thought about Chidinma, a woman on a plastic chair in a corridor, a boy watching his uncle carry grief home through the rain. She unfolded the paper. She looked at the number. She picked up her phone. Blessing answered on the second ring, and her voice, young and tightly controlled and frightened beneath the control, confirmed everything Adiz had said. They talked for 20 minutes. By the end of the call, Blessing had agreed to write and sign a full account of Tuesday morning, unaltered, by 10 o'clock Sunday night. She would send it directly to the board representative's email, an address that Adiz had quietly included at the bottom of the folded paper. Adanna put her phone down on the table. Across the restaurant, a live band was setting up, 2 guitarists and a talking drum, and a woman in a silver gelly adjusting her microphone. The kind of band that played music Lagos carried in its bloodstream. Adanna sat there in the warm noise of it and understood that she had just made a choice that was either going to define her or end her career in this organization. She could not yet tell which. And then her phone lit up again. A message from Emeka Okafor's personal number, how she now had it in her contacts. She would remember asking herself later. It said, Auntie Obiageli would like to see you tomorrow.
Sunday.
10 a.m. 14, Glover Road, Ikoyi. She will cook. She says to tell you, she makes very good ofe onugbu. Adanna read it, set her phone down, looked at the woman in the painting on the gallery wall, standing at the edge of a compound, looking toward a horizon that was either dawn or dusk. She thought, I have no idea what is coming next. But for the first time in a week, she was not afraid of that. 14, Glover Road in Ikoyi sat behind a low whitewashed wall with a bougainvillea vine growing over the gate in cascades of deep pink. The compound was not large, but it had been tended with the kind of sustained care that spoke of a person who paid attention to the small beautiful things even when the world was busy and difficult. There was a small garden near the gate, bitter leaf, utazi scent leaf, the kind of kitchen garden a woman plants when she intends to stay somewhere and feed people for a long time. Adanna knocked at 9:55. Auntie Obiageli opened the door herself and looked pleased in the direct, uncomplicated way of a woman who says what she means. She was wearing a cotton house dress of deep indigo and had a kitchen towel over one shoulder. The smell from inside the house was immediate and specific, bitter leaf soup, deepened with crayfish and uziza, and something else Adanna could not name but recognized as the smell of food made properly, from the beginning. You came, Auntie Obiageli said. I said I would, Ma. Most people who say they will come, do not come. She stepped back to let Adanna in. So, you are already ahead. The interior of the house was the kind of home that tells you everything about the person who lives in it. The walls had framed photographs, many of them black and white, formal portraits alongside informal ones. A young Emeka Okafor at what appeared to be a university graduation, a much younger Obiageli with a woman who shared Emeka's eyes and his particular quality of stillness. There were bookshelves and a corner cabinet with small wooden figurines and cloth-bound journals, and a large Bible with a cracked spine that had been read seriously and often. The furniture was old and solid and well-kept. It was a house where someone had loved being alive. They sat at the kitchen table, a wide, scarred wooden table that had obviously been the center of this house for many years, and Auntie Obiageli served the ofe onugbu with EBA and a tall glass of cold water without asking what Adanna wanted, because she had already decided what Adanna needed.
Eat first, she said.
I talk better when the people I am talking to are eating.
Adanna ate.
The soup was exceptional, the kind that carries a full memory of who made it and why and for whom. She said so. Auntie Obiageli nodded with the satisfied precision of someone whose cooking was the one area of life about which she felt no false modesty. Then the old woman folded her hands on the table and told her about Chidinma. Chidinma Okafor had been the youngest of 3 sisters from Enugu. She had married young. She was 19 when she married Emeka's father, a quiet, gentle man named Chibundo who drove other people's cars and read the Bible and believed his circumstances were temporary. They had 2 children, one of whom was Emeka. They lived in 3 rooms in a yard with 4 other families and shared a kitchen, and made it work because Chidinma was the kind of woman who made things work through sheer force of love and organization. She had a gift, Auntie Obiageli said, for making people feel seen. Neighbors came to her with their problems. Children who were not hers sat in her kitchen. She knew everyone's name and their mother's name, and the name of whatever difficulty was currently pressing on them. She had the quality, rarer than any formal qualification, of making a person feel that their existence was welcome and that their suffering was not invisible. She was 34, Auntie Obiageli said. Not old. A young woman. When she collapsed, Chibundo was at work. I was in the market. My brother, God rest him, was the one who found her. He ran with her.
She paused.
You understand what that means. He ran, carrying a grown woman, in the rain, across that whole distance, and they still said no at the gate. Adanna looked at the table. I am not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Auntie Obiageli said. That is not why I asked you to come. I am telling you because Emeka has never told you the whole of it.
He tells the outline.
He does not tell you that after she died, he stopped speaking for almost 4 months. He does not tell you that for those 4 months he came to my house every day after school and sat in this kitchen, this very kitchen, and I fed him, and he did not speak, and that was how we kept him alive. Soup and silence, and staying close. The house was very quiet. He built Meridian in her name, Auntie Obiageli said. Not in the sense that her name is on the building. In the sense that the whole philosophy of the place, the reason it exists is because of who she was. She never let anyone stand outside a door and feel like their pain was not worth attending to. The old woman looked at Adanna directly. When he goes to test his hospitals, he is not looking for wrongdoing. He is looking for her. He is checking whether the spirit he built the place with is still alive inside it. Adanna felt the tears before she decided to cry and stop them, not because she was ashamed of them, but because she was listening and she did not want to miss a word. You know what he told me, Auntie Obiageli said, after he came home from being turned away from his own hospital? He said, Auntie, I was afraid I would find nothing worth saving. She shook her head slowly. He was not talking about the hospital. Adanna looked at her. He was talking about his faith in people, the old woman said simply. He tests the hospitals because he is still testing whether the world is the kind of place his mother believed it was. Whether people are still capable of the decency she showed to every human being who walked through her yard. She tilted her head. And then you apologized. Not because you had to. Not because you were managing the situation. Because it was true and you knew it and you said it. That was what mattered to him. They sat together in the warm kitchen with the smell of ofe onugbu and the sound of Lagos outside, and the bougainvillea pink against the gate. After a long time, Adanna said, What am I supposed to do with all of this? Auntie Obiageli smiled.
You are supposed to know it, she said.
Knowing changes how you carry things. That is all knowing ever does. But that is not nothing. She refilled Adanna's water glass without being asked. Now, she said briskly, standing and moving to the counter, there is more EBA. And I made chin-chin. You will not leave without eating chin-chin. Adanna laughed. A real laugh, sudden and surprised, and it felt like something unclenching in her chest. She stayed for another hour. She ate the chin-chin. She showed Auntie Obiageli a photograph of her mother on her phone, and the old woman looked at it for a long time and said, "A woman with that face raised someone good." She looked around the kitchen once more before she left, at the scarred table, at the Bible with the cracked spine, at the garden through the window. She was at the gate when her phone lit up with a message from Adanna Osei. Blessing submitted her statement at 9:47 p.m. last night. The board representative has acknowledged receipt. The committee meeting Monday has been restructured. Emeka Ease has been asked not to attend. Adanna stood at the gate of 14 Glover Road and read the message twice. The bougainvillea moved in the Ikoyi breeze above her head, cascading pink over the white wall. She looked up at it. She thought of a woman named Chidinma who never let anyone stand outside a door and feel as though their pain was not worth attending to. She put her phone in her bag and walked toward the road to find a cab. Somewhere behind her, Auntie Obiageli's gate clicked shut with the sound of something both closed and opened at the same time. Monday morning, Adanna put on her scrubs. She pinned on her badge. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, not with the nervous audit she had been conducting all week, but with something quieter, something that had settled during the past 9 days into a kind of clarity. She drove to the hospital. The sky over Lagos was overcast, the particular gray that preceded the afternoon rains, the kind of sky that made the city look cinematic and a little uncertain. Traffic on the expressway was its usual dense, argumentative self. Someone's old Toyota was playing P-Square at a volume the universe had not requested. A woman at a bus stop was selling groundnuts from a wide tray balanced on her head with the serene confidence of long practice. Adanna watched all of it through the window and felt, for the first time in over a week, simply present. She arrived at the hospital at 7. She changed. She went to the nursing station. She reviewed the overnight handover. She checked on Baba Rasaki, who had been moved to a general ward as he recovered, and who greeted her with the news that his son was coming from Abeokuta to take him home, and asked again whether she liked ube.
She said yes.
He said he would send her some. She said she looked forward to it. She saw Nkechi, the young mother who had been frightened of surgery. The surgery had gone well. Nkechi was sitting up in bed, slightly pale, but smiling at something on her phone. She looked up when Adanna entered and said, "Nurse Adanna, thank you for talking to me. I was not as scared as I thought I was going to be." "You were braver than you knew," Adanna told her. At 10:30, Matron Gozi appeared at the nursing station and asked her to come. The committee room was different from Thursday. The legal officer's chair was empty. The board representative, the quiet woman in the corner who had written and said nothing before, was seated now at the head of the table, not the side. Her name was Mrs. Falasaid Abayadan, and in the intervening days she had acquired a different kind of presence in the room, the presence of someone who is now the one in charge of what was said and how it landed. Adanna Osei was there, the medical director, Chukwemeka. And Adanna felt her breath catch and adjust. Emeka Okafor himself, seated to the left of Mrs. Abayadan, in a charcoal suit and the same steady expression she had come to understand was not coldness, but the face of someone who paid very careful attention.
He was not supposed to be there.
The CEO was not a member of the review committee. He had evidently decided to be there anyway. "Sit down, Nurse Osei," Mrs. Abayadan said. Adanna sat. Mrs. Abayadan opened her folder and spoke clearly and without ceremony. She summarized the incident, the date, the time, the parties involved, the original log entry, the CCTV record, the witness accounts. She noted that one committee member had been excused from this session. She did not explain why. She did not need to. Then she said, The committee's finding is as follows. The incident of Tuesday, the 9th of July, constituted a clinical and procedural error in the management of a patient presenting with cardiac symptoms. Nurse Osei's response at the intake desk, while within the financial eligibility parameters of hospital administrative protocol, failed to meet the clinical standard of care required when a patient reports chest pain of any duration. This represents a failure of professional judgment that warranted formal review. Adanna held herself still. However, Mrs. Abayadin continued, the committee also notes for the record that Nurse Osei's subsequent conduct, her voluntary acknowledgement of the error without prompting, her candid statement during review, and her full cooperation with the investigative process, reflects the standard of professional integrity that this organization is committed to modeling and maintaining. She looked up from the folder. The committee's recommendation is formal documentation of the incident in the personnel file, a mandatory clinical refresher on patient intake triage procedures, and continued employment in good standing.
Adanna breathed.
Additionally, Mrs. Abayadin said, the board has a separate matter to address, independent of this review. Mr. Okafor. Emeka Okafor shifted forward slightly in his chair. He looked at Adanna with the same stillness he had looked at her through the glass door of Suite 12, through the reception counter, through every moment of this strange, instructive week. Meridian Health Group is initiating a review of patient intake protocols across all 15 facilities in our West Africa network, he said. We are establishing a patient dignity and access task force to revise every intake procedure that creates barriers to initial clinical assessment regardless of financial status. That task force will be co-led by a senior clinical voice and a policy voice from within the organization.
He paused.
We have identified the clinical co-lead. Her background includes 4 years of frontline hospital nursing, exceptional patient outcomes, and, most importantly, a demonstrated capacity to be honest about failure and grow from it. Qualities that, in my experience, are rarer than any formal qualification. He looked at her directly. Nurse Osei, we would like you to take that role. The room was quiet in the way important rooms get quiet. Adanna looked at him. She thought of Auntie Obiagili's kitchen. She thought of Chidinma, a woman who never let anyone stand outside a door and feel as though their pain was not worth attending to. She thought of Baba Rasaki and Uba. She thought of Nkechi saying, I was not as scared as I thought I was going to be. I accept, she said. Emeka Okafor nodded. Not with triumph. With the nod of a man who had been hoping for a particular answer and received it. Afterward, in the corridor outside the committee room, Chukwuemeka found her and shook her hand with genuine warmth. Adiz Nwosu touched her arm briefly and said, Well done. Matron Gozi waited until everyone else had moved away and then held Adanna's face in both her hands for a moment, a gesture so maternal it bypassed every professional distance, and said only, Your mother would be proud. Adanna walked back to the nursing station. She completed her shift. At the end of it, she sat in the break room with a cup of tea that was actually hot this time. Tamawa sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Task Force co-lead, Tamawa said finally. Yes. Of the whole network. 15 facilities. Because you apologized to the man you turned away from his own hospital. Because Adanna stopped, thought about it carefully. Because I told the truth when I was afraid of what the truth would cost me. And because a woman named Chidinma, who died before I was born, believed people were capable of better than their worst moments. She looked at her tea. And because her son decided to check whether she was right. We have come so far together in this story. Through a hospital lobby on a Tuesday morning. Through a break room with cold tea. Through a kitchen in Ikoyi that smelled of ofonagbu. Through the long, difficult work of becoming more honest about who we are and who we want to be. Tell us where you are watching from, and stay with us all the way to the end, because this final chapter holds the moment this whole story has been building toward. 3 months later, the Meridian Patient Dignity and Access Task Force had been running for 12 weeks, and it had already changed 27 intake procedures across 9 facilities. It had introduced a mandatory clinical triage protocol for any patient reporting pain or distress, regardless of payment status, so that no nurse at any Meridian desk could redirect a suffering person without first completing a basic symptom assessment. It had revised the financial counseling process so that payment arrangements could be discussed after initial care, not before. It had retrained 240 frontline staff across Nigeria, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire. It was, by every internal measure, working. Adanna ran the clinical side of it from an office she had not expected to have, a small room on the 4th floor of Meridian Medical Center with a window that faced the Lagos Lagoon, and a desk she had covered with printed protocol documents and a single photograph of her mother, and a clay pot of Ghanaian cacpashito her sister Abina had sent from Kumasi for your new important office. She worked long hours. She was good at it. She was surprised by how much she was good at it, how much the work of changing a broken system required exactly the same skills as caring for a patient. Listening, identifying where the pain was coming from, not moving too fast. She also still worked shifts on the ward. She had requested this specifically. She wanted to stay in the rooms with the patients, with the work that had brought her to nursing in the first place. Matron Gozi had agreed, without argument. Baba Rasaki had indeed sent ube from Ogun State. A full bag of it arrived with a note written in an unsteady hand that said simply, "For the nurse who listened. God bless you." On the first Saturday of October, there was a staff event at Meridian, a ceremony marking the formal launch of the task force's first policy report, a document Adanna had spent 6 weeks writing. It was held in the hospital's main conference hall, and it was the kind of event that Lagos does with particular flair. White linen, floral arrangements of tropical flowers, a high-life band for the reception, staff from across the network who had come in person or joined by video from Accra, Abidjan, and Port Harcourt. Adanna wore a cream and gold iro and buba with a matching geli she had tied herself, slightly imperfectly, and had accepted Tamawa's corrections on the second attempt. She stood at the back of the conference hall before it began and looked at the room filling up. Her colleagues, senior staff from the corporate office, a few journalists, members of the board, and felt the very specific, sober weight of something she had built. Emeka Okafor gave a brief address. He was not a man for long speeches. He spoke about his mother. He spoke about what he had set out to build, and the ways institutions could drift from their founding purpose without anyone intending the drift. He said that the purpose of this report was not simply procedural. It was a restatement of the original covenant this organization had made with every person who walked through its doors in pain. Then he said, "The person who did most of the work you are all about to read about is someone who joined this organization's clinical leadership 3 months ago after teaching me something I had perhaps become too comfortable assuming I already knew." He looked at Adanna at the back of the room. "Nurse Osei, please come forward." She walked up through the room with her geli slightly imperfect and her spine straight and her heart very full. He handed her the published report. The cover read, "A Covenant of Care, Patient Dignity and Access Standards for the Meridian Health Group Network." Adanna looked at it for a moment. She thought of Chidinma, a woman who never let anyone stand outside a door and feel as though their pain was not worth attending to. She thought of her mother's hands on a sewing machine past midnight. Her father's chalk-dusted jacket. The 3 rooms in Kumasi where 4 children had been taught that hard work was love and love was the beginning of everything. She looked up. "Thank you," she said to Emeka Okafor.
To the room.
To all of it. He looked back at her with that still, careful expression. And then, quietly, briefly, he smiled. Auntie Obiageli was seated in the front row. She was wearing deep burgundy again, and she had brought a small bag of chin-chin in her handbag that she later gave to Tamawa, who ate it with the unself-conscious joy of someone who had been perfectly correctly assessed. After the ceremony, in the small garden outside the conference hall, the city visible beyond the compound wall, the lagoon glittering in the October light, Emeka Okafor found Adanna standing by herself for a moment. "How are you finding the work?" he asked. "It is the hardest thing I have done," she said honestly. "And the most important." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want you to know that what happened in that lobby in July was not the reason I gave you this opportunity. It was the reason I paid attention." He looked toward the lagoon. "What gave you the opportunity was everything you did after. Every honest word. Every difficult conversation. The choice to send that information through the right channels even when you did not know if it would help you or destroy you. Those things.
He paused.
My mother used to say that character is not the absence of failure. It is what a person does in the moment just after the failure, when nobody is watching and they still have to choose. Adanna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me honestly. He looked at her. Go on. That first morning.
The test.
Were you in actual pain? He held her gaze. Yes. And you still stayed outside long enough to make the point. It was important. You are a very stubborn man, she said. He looked surprised. Then he laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised and genuine, the laugh of a person who has not laughed it often enough. I have been called worse, he said. Tamawa appeared at Adanna's shoulder, slightly breathless, holding a glass of zobo and the empty chin-chin bag. Ada, the photographer, wants a group picture, and also I have been told to tell you that the journalist from this day is asking for a quote, and also, she looked at Emeka Okafor and switched immediately to a more composed register. Good evening, sir. The zobo is very good tonight. I am glad, he said gravely. Tamawa pulled Adanna toward the photographer. Adanna went, and just before the crowd swallowed her, she looked back once at the man who had walked into his own hospital in cracked sandals to see whether his mother's belief in people was still justified. He was looking at the lagoon. Quiet.
Still.
The particular stillness of a man who was holding something private and precious. She thought he looked, in that moment, not like a CEO or a property owner or a man of considerable consequence. He looked like a boy who had once sat in a kitchen in Ikoyi and been kept alive by soup and silence and the sustained, unbreakable love of people who refused to let him disappear into his grief. She thought, Chidinma was right. People are capable of better than their worst moments. She stepped into the photograph. She smiled, a full, genuine smile, the kind that rarely came without good reason. The lagoon shone behind the compound wall. The high-life band began to play, and Lagos, enormous and relentless and alive, went on around them all, the way it always did, carrying everyone's story inside its enormous, improbable, beautiful noise. And that is where we leave them. Adanna Osei, who looked at a man in cracked sandals and saw a category, and then, because she was ultimately the person her mother had raised her to be, looked again and saw the truth. Emeka Okafor, who built a hospital in his mother's honor and walked into it as a poor man to find out whether her spirit was still alive inside the walls he had made. Chidinma, whose name meant God is good, and who never let anyone stand outside a door and feel as though their pain was not worth attending to. Gone before the hospital existed. Present in every room of it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Hit that notification bell and never miss a single story. Share this video today with someone who needs to be reminded that honesty is not weakness, that grace is not weakness, that the choice to grow from a mistake is one of the bravest things a human being can do. Drop a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. What moment hit you hardest? What line you will carry with you? We read every single comment, and we are grateful for every single one of you, wherever in this world you are watching from. Like this video, share it, and stay with us, because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about real human beings making hard choices, finding their way back to who they were always meant to be. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. We will see you in the next one.